The autumn cold came down from the high country like a judgment, stripping the last copper leaves from the cottonwoods along Bitter Creek and pushing a gray sky low over the valley floor. Cole Hargrove felt it through the boards of his wagon seat, a chill that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the letter folded in his breast pocket. He had read it so many times the creases had gone soft as cloth. The Territorial Placement Agency had been admirably clear. Miss Alice Crane would arrive on the 14th of October, would serve as household helper and companion to one small girl, and the arrangement would conclude on the 25th of December, Christmas Day. Then she would be reassigned, presumably to a warmer household in a warmer county, and Cole would be left to manage on his own again, the way he had managed since Clara died 18 months ago. Poorly, and with great determination not to let Lily know how poorly. He pulled the wagon to a stop outside the Millhaven station just as the afternoon train released its breath in a long white sigh. The platform was nearly empty. A station master leaned against a post with his hat pulled down. Two cowboys loaded crates onto a freight car without looking up. And then the passenger door swung open, and a woman stepped down carrying a carpet bag in each hand, her dark hair pinned so firmly it refused to acknowledge the wind, her expression so composed it suggested she had made peace with worse arrivals than this one. Cole climbed down from the wagon. He was a tall man, lean from the kind of work that does not leave room for softness, and he was aware that he did not look welcoming. He rarely did anymore. The woman spotted the sign he held, Crane, and walked directly toward him, neither rushing nor hesitating. "Mr. Hargrove," she said. "Miss Crane," he said. She looked at the wagon, at the two-track road that disappeared into the gray hills beyond town, and then at him. "How far?" she asked. 4 miles, he said. "Rough ones." "All right," she said, and handed him both bags. He had not expected that. He had expected complaints, or at least a pause. He took the bags and walked her to the wagon, and the autumn wind pushed at their backs like it was in a hurry to get them home. The wagon rolled north through a landscape that made no promises. The hills were brown and the creek ran thin, and the fence posts along the road listed at tired angles. Cole kept his eyes on the horses and said nothing for the first mile, which was his way. Alice sat with her hands folded in her lap and said nothing for the first mile, which surprised him. Most people, when they were nervous, filled the silence with words. She seemed to find the silence useful rather than threatening, and he found himself noticing that. Noticing it the way you notice when a door that always squeaks has been quietly oiled. At the second mile, she said, the letter mentioned a daughter. "Lily," he said. "She is 4 years old. Does she speak much?" He glanced sideways. "She used to, less so, this past year." Alice absorbed this without comment. After a moment, she said, "Children go quiet when they're waiting for something to stay." Cole had no answer for that. He let the horses have their pace and watched the road and thought that the placement agency had perhaps, for once, sent him someone useful. Lily was on the porch when they arrived, wrapped in a coat 2 sizes too large that had belonged to her mother. She held a rag doll by one arm and she did not come down the steps, only stood watching with enormous gray eyes that had a habit of seeing directly through a person's intentions to whatever lay underneath. Alice climbed down from the wagon before Cole could assist her and walked up to the porch steps and crouched down so that she and Lily were at eye level. She did not speak first. She waited, the way you wait for a deer that has heard something in the brush. Lily looked at her for a long moment, then looked at the carpet bags Cole was hauling from the wagon. "You brought 2 bags," she said. "I did," Alice said. "Are you staying a long time?" Alice glanced at Cole. He looked at the porch boards. "We'll see," Alice said, which was honest, and Lily seemed to accept that more readily than a lie would have served. Inside, the cabin was clean in the way of places kept by a man who has learned necessity. The dishes stacked, the floor swept, the hearth blackened but serviceable. What was missing was harder to name. Color, perhaps, the smell of something baking, evidence of a woman's particular attention to the corners of things. Alice set her smaller bag on the table and looked around without judgment. "I can make supper," she said, "if you'll tell me where things are." Cole showed her the root cellar, the salt box, the flour barrel. He showed her where the kindling was split and stacked, and where the good cast-iron skillet hung. He showed her all of it efficiently and without ceremony, because he was a man who organized his world by function, and he assumed that was sufficient. She found a jar of dried rosemary on the highest shelf and looked at him. He looked away. That had been Clara's. "I'll leave it there," Alice said simply, and began making cornbread. Lily drifted into the kitchen like smoke, silent and curious, and settled on the stool near the hearth, watching Alice's hands move. She did not ask questions. She watched the way small children watch things they are deciding whether to trust. Supper was cornbread and salt pork, and the last of the fall squash, roasted until it went sweet. Cole ate 2 portions. Lily ate everything on her plate, which was notable because for the past 3 weeks she had been eating like a bird with reservations. After supper, when Lily was in bed and the fire had dropped to coals, Cole cleared his throat and said the thing he had been carrying all evening. "The agency's letter. You've seen the terms." "Christmas," Alice said. She was mending one of Lily's stockings by firelight. She did not look up. "Yes, the 25th. I read it," she said. "Good. I want it understood. I'm not—" He stopped, reorganized. "This is a working arrangement, clear and honest. I don't want the child to become attached and then—" "And then what?" Alice said. She looked up now, and her eyes were level. He had no good ending for the sentence. He said, "I just want it clear." "It's clear," she said, and she went back to the mending, and the fire crackled low, and the night pressed cold against the windows, and Cole Hargrove, for the first time in 18 months, did not feel entirely alone in his own house. He did not examine that feeling. He banked the fire, said goodnight, and went to bed. The next 2 weeks passed in the practical rhythms of a working household finding its footing. Alice rose before dawn and had coffee ready when Cole came in from the morning chores, which she had learned was the first thing he looked for, and the thing most likely to determine the color of his entire morning. She learned that Lily liked her eggs cooked firm, and her cornmeal mush with a small pour of honey. She learned that Cole took his coffee black, and his conversation in short, measured doses, like medicine. She learned that the oldest gray mare had a preference for being spoken to before being hitched, and that the chickens required a specific sequence of gaits, or they staged what could only be described as a rebellion. She learned these things without being told most of them, because she was the kind of woman who pays attention as a form of survival. For his part, Cole learned things about Alice that he had not expected to learn about anyone he had hired. He learned that she had opinions about the placement of tools, and that her opinions were usually correct. He learned that she could fix a harness buckle faster than his ranch hand, Denny, who had been fixing harness buckles for 20 years. He learned that she sang quietly to Lily at night, old hymns with the words altered slightly to be gentler, and that Lily had begun sleeping through until morning, for the first time since Clara died. One evening near the end of October, Cole came into the kitchen and found Lily at the table with a piece of paper and a stub of pencil, her tongue between her teeth in concentration. Alice stood at the stove with her back to him, stirring something that smelled of browned onion and dried herbs. "What are you drawing?" Cole asked Lily. "Not drawing," Lily said. "Writing." He came around the table to look. At the top of the page, in careful childish letters, was the word December. Below it was a date, the 25th, copied with great effort from the agency letter that had been sitting on the corner of the desk. And the 25th had been crossed out. Cole looked at his daughter. Lily pressed her lips together and looked back at him with those gray eyes that saw everything. "Lily," he said quietly, "that's not how arrangements work." "You didn't cross it out," Lily said. "I did." He did not know what to say to that. He looked at Alice. Alice was still stirring. Her back was to both of them, and she said nothing, but he noticed that her stirring had gone very still. He picked up the paper and set it back on the desk, and he did not discuss it further that evening, but he did not throw it away. November arrived with the first hard frost, and with it came news that Cole had been dreading in the way a man dreads a thing he knows is coming, but hopes the calendar might lose track of. The Consolidated Land Trust out of Denver had begun filing survey claims along Bitter Creek, and 3 of the ranchers to Cole's south had already received notices that their water rights were under dispute. Cole's neighbor, Hector Aldridge, rode over on a Tuesday morning to tell him that the trust surveyor had been seen walking Cole's fence line at dawn. Cole listened with his arms crossed and his jaw set and thanked Hector and watched him ride back down the road. Then he went into the barn and stood there for a while in the dark, smelling horses and straw, thinking about the water. The creek fed his upper pasture. Without it, he could not run cattle through the dry months. Without cattle, the place was a fine view and nothing else. He had borrowed to build the new barn after Clara died, reasoning that if he was going to hold on to the land alone, he needed to increase the herd. If the trust took the water rights, the loan came due, and there was no way to meet it. He came in for noon dinner and ate without speaking. Lily watched him with those careful eyes. Alice set a plate in front of him and then sat down across from him and looked at him the same direct way she always did. "Tell me," she said. He told her. He was not sure why. He had not told anyone else, not Hector, not Denny, not the banker in town. But Alice sat across from him at his own table, with her hands folded and her attention complete, and the words came out. When he finished, she said, "Do you have a deed with the water right recorded?" "I do." "Who filed the trust's claim?" "A lawyer named Mertug, out of Denver." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My father was a land clerk in Nebraska for 11 years. I grew up reading deeds the way other children read primers. If you'll let me look at your papers tonight, I can tell you whether the claim has merit." Cole looked at her. He was a man who did not accept help easily, having spent his adult life learning that the only reliable source of it was himself. But there was something in the offer that was not charity. It was practical, plain-spoken, offered without sentimentality. It fit the vocabulary he understood. "After supper," he said. After Lily was in bed, they sat at the kitchen table with the deed box between them and the lamp turned up. Alice read his land patent and the water filing and the trust's survey notice with the same quiet attention she gave everything, and Cole watched her face for signs of what she was finding. "Here," she said, pointing. "The water right was recorded at the county seat in September of 1888. 3 years before the trust incorporated in the territory. Any claim they file has to contend with this date. They can't supersede a prior appropriation with a subsequent incorporation." Cole leaned over to look. "You're sure?" "No," she said. "I'm not a lawyer, but I know enough to say you need to get this to a lawyer before the trust surveyor finishes his work. The record is on your side. The record needs to speak." He sat back. He turned the deed in his hands and looked at her. The firelight moved across her face and she looked back at him steadily. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, not unkindly, but honestly. "Because it's the right thing," she said, "and because Lily needs this land to still be here in the spring." He did not answer that. He put the deed back in the box and closed the lid, but something in the room had shifted in a way he did not have words for. Cole rode into Millhaven the following Thursday and spent 3 hours with a lawyer named Garner, who had a reputation for being expensive and correct. Garner looked at the water filing and confirmed everything Alice had said. and agreed to send a letter to Murtagh's firm in Denver on Cole's behalf, citing the prior appropriation date. He charged $2 for the letter and $4 for the consultation, and Cole paid it without flinching, because a man who spends $6 to save a ranch is a man who has done math correctly. He came home in the late afternoon to find the kitchen smelling of apple and cinnamon. Alice had traded a jar of preserved plums with the storekeeper's wife for a bushel of late apples, and she and Lily were at the table making pies. Or rather, Alice was making pies while Lily pressed her small fists into the scraps of dough and announced the results with great confidence. Cole stood in the doorway and watched them for a moment before either of them knew he was there. Lily's hair had been braided with a scrap of blue ribbon. He did not know where the ribbon had come from, and there was flour on her nose, and her small voice was going steadily, telling Alice something elaborate about the rag doll's recent feelings regarding winter. Alice listened with the particular quality of attention that made a child feel that their words mattered, asking a question here and there, her hands moving efficiently through the pastry without looking down. He had not seen Lily talk freely like that in over a year. Something in Cole's chest moved in a way that felt structural, like a timber settling, or a wall deciding not to fall. He cleared his throat and came inside, and Lily looked up and said, "Papa, Alice is teaching me pies." And Cole said, "Is that right?" and sat down at the table, and somehow ended up rolling the edge of a crust while Lily talked, which was not something he had planned to do that afternoon. When the pies were in the oven and Lily had been sent to wash the flour from her hands, Alice wiped down the table and said, without looking at him, "How did it go in town?" "Well," he said, "Garner thinks the prior filing holds. He's sending the letter." She nodded. She folded the cloth precisely in thirds and set it on the edge of the basin. "Good," she said. He watched her hands. She had capable hands. He was a man who noticed capable hands because his own life had taught him to rely on them. "The ribbon," he said. "In Lily's hair." Alice glanced at him. "I had it in my bag. Blue seemed right." He nodded slowly. He did not say thank you, because the words felt too small for what he meant. But he looked at the flour-dusted table and the stacked tin pie plates and the lamp that she had trimmed so it burned more evenly, and he thought that the cabin had begun to look like something again, like a place someone had decided to care for. He went to bed that night with the deed box locked and the fire banked and the smell of apple pie in the walls, and he lay in the dark and listened to the wind and thought about a crossed-out date on a piece of paper. December arrived in silence, the first real snow falling on the 3rd and not letting up for 2 days. Cole spent both days in the barn and the fences and came in each evening coated in white, and Alice had hot food and dry socks waiting, with a matter-of-factness that he had stopped trying not to be grateful for. On the 7th, a rider came from the lawyer in town with a note. Garner had received a response from Murtagh's firm in Denver. The trust was withdrawing its survey claim on Cole's water right. The prior appropriation date had been sufficient. The letter was 2 sentences long and grudging in tone, and it was the best thing Cole had read in a year and a half. He walked into the kitchen holding it, and Alice looked at his face and said, "Good news." "They're withdrawing," he said. She closed her eyes for a moment, just briefly, the way a person does when relief is too large to hold with an open face. Then she opened them and said, "Good," and went back to the bread she was shaping. Cole set the letter on the table. He stood in the kitchen that smelled of yeast and wood smoke and thought about what he had been avoiding thinking about since October. "Alice," he said. She kept her hands in the dough. "Yes." "The agency's date, Christmas." "Yes," she said. "Lily crossed it out," he said. She did not answer immediately. She turned the bread once, pressed it, turned it again. "She did," Alice said. "I didn't put it back." She looked up at that. "The date," he said. "I didn't rewrite it. I didn't correct her." The kitchen was very quiet. The snow moved against the window glass in soft, persistent whispers. "What are you saying, Cole?" Alice asked. Her voice was even, but her hands had gone still. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, which was unusual. He rarely sat when he was saying something important, as though the act of standing kept the words from going somewhere he hadn't authorized. But he sat now, and he looked at her directly. "I'm saying the arrangement as written was never what this became," he said. "And I think you know that, and I think you've been waiting to see if I did." Alice set the bread aside and wiped her hands on her apron. She looked at him with those level eyes that had never once given him less than the truth. "I've been waiting," she said. "Yes. I can't promise you an easy life," he said. "This land is hard and the winters are long, and I am—" He paused, not from evasion, but from care. "I am not a man who finds things easy to say." "I've noticed," she said. "But I am a man who keeps his word," he said, "and I'm asking you, plainly, if you'd consider a different arrangement, a permanent one." She looked at him for a long moment. The fire popped. Outside, the snow continued its patient, unhurried work. "Lily would need to be part of that conversation," Alice said. "She already had it," Cole said. "In October, with a pencil." Something moved across Alice's face then. Something warm and unguarded that he had not seen there before, or perhaps had been too careful to look for. She breathed in slowly. "Yes," she said. "I'll consider it a permanent arrangement." He did not reach across the table, and he did not say anything poetic. He was not built for poetry. He said, "Good," and stood up, and after a moment she smiled, just briefly, with the side of her mouth. "The bread needs another hour," she said. "I'll be in the barn," he said, and he went, because that was who he was, and she understood it, which was why this was going to work. They were married on the 18th of December, a week before Christmas, in the front room of the Millhaven Church. The preacher, a compact man named Briggs who had married 3 generations of Bitter Creek families and seen enough hardship to know the real thing when it stood in front of him, conducted the ceremony in 20 minutes and declared it done with evident satisfaction. Lily wore her best dress and held Alice's hand through most of the service, and at the end turned to Denny, who had come in from the ranch as witness, and said with the absolute authority of a 4-year-old, "She's staying." Denny said, "So I see," and wiped his eye with his coat sleeve in what he described afterward as dust, though there was no dust anywhere in the church. Cole placed a narrow band of silver on Alice's finger. He had ridden to Millhaven alone 2 days prior to have it made by the jeweler on Front Street, a quiet transaction he had not told anyone about, and when Alice looked down at it she was still for a moment with the particular stillness of someone receiving something they had not expected to receive. That evening they drove home through the snow in the wagon, Lily asleep between them, her head against Alice's arm, one mittened hand wrapped around Alice's coat sleeve as though she intended to maintain the connection even while unconscious. Cole watched the road and the dark pines along the ridge and the stars emerging between the clouds, and he said quietly so as not to wake Lily, "Thank you for coming." Alice looked at him across the sleeping child. "Thank you for not putting the date back," she said. He said nothing, which with Cole meant everything was understood. The cabin glowed through the trees as they came down the last stretch of road, the lamp burning in the window that Alice had left lit before they departed that morning. It was a small thing, but small things are what a home is built of, and as Cole lifted Lily from the wagon and carried her inside and Alice came through the door behind him with the lamp swinging golden in her hand, the cabin felt, for the first time in a long, terrible while, like it was full. Christmas came 5 days later, and no one mentioned the agency's date. There was no need. On the desk in the corner, that piece of paper with December written in careful letters sat just as Lily had left it, the 25th still firmly, irrevocably, lovingly crossed out, and no one would ever write it back in. Now, friends, if you have walked this story all the way to its end, you know something that Cole and Alice learned slowly and honestly, that a bargain made in practicality can grow into something the heart did not budget for, that a child's pencil mark can be braver than anything a grown man manages to say, that love on the frontier was rarely spoken in grand declarations. It was spoken in dry socks left by the fire, and pies made on a cold afternoon, and a lamp left burning so someone coming home through the dark would see the light from a long way off. If this story brought you warmth tonight, leave a word in the comments. Tell us about a time when someone stayed longer than they planned. Subscribe and travel with us on more journeys through the Old West, where ordinary people built extraordinary lives, one honest act at a time. Good night. God bless you and yours. Rest well.